Lisa thought she had found paradise when she first drove through the gates of Oakwood Gardens. The security guard waved her through with a friendly smile, and she couldn't help but gasp at what she saw. Every lawn looked like something from a magazine. The trees were perfectly trimmed, the sidewalks spotless, and every house seemed to gleam in the afternoon sun. "Mom, look at that playground." 7-year-old Katie bounced in her car seat, pointing at the beautiful play area complete with swings, slides, and a sandbox that actually looked clean enough to play in. Lisa had been searching for months to find the right place for her and Katie to start fresh. After the divorce, she wanted somewhere safe, somewhere that felt like a real community, somewhere that would give Katie the stable childhood she deserved. The real estate agent had mentioned the homeowners association rules, but Lisa actually liked that idea. Rules meant order. Rules meant her neighbors would take care of their properties. Rules meant Katie could ride her bike on clean, safe streets. The house itself was perfect too. A cozy 2-story home with a small front yard and a decent backyard where Katie could play. There was even a big oak tree that would provide shade in the summer. Lisa could already picture hanging a swing from one of those sturdy branches. "What do you think, sweetie?" Lisa asked as they pulled into the driveway. "I love it. Can we move in tomorrow?" Katie was already unbuckling her seatbelt, eager to explore. Lisa laughed. If only it were that simple. But 3 weeks later, they were indeed moving in. The neighbors seemed nice enough, waving from their perfectly manicured yards as the moving truck pulled up. One woman even brought over a plate of cookies and introduced herself as Helen from 2 houses down. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Helen said with a warm smile. "You're going to love it here." We all look out for each other. Those first few days felt like a dream. Katie made friends with the kid next door, and they spent hours playing in the backyard. Lisa finally felt like she could breathe again. Working as a family court judge was stressful enough, but coming home to chaos had made everything worse. Here, everything was calm and organized. That's when she met Rebecca Thornton. Rebecca was the HOA president, a woman in her early 60s who seemed to take her job very seriously. She showed up at Lisa's door on a Saturday morning, clipboard in hand and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Rebecca, your HOA president," she announced. "I wanted to personally welcome you and go over a few important community guidelines." Lisa invited her in for coffee, thinking this was just a friendly neighborly visit. She was wrong. "Now I see you have some boxes still on your front porch," Rebecca said, making a note on her clipboard. "Our community standards require all moving materials to be removed within 48 hours of delivery." Lisa glanced toward the front door. There were maybe 3 small boxes that she hadn't gotten to yet. "Oh, sure. I'll move those today." Good. Rebecca made another note. "And I noticed your daughter left her bicycle on the front lawn yesterday evening. All recreational equipment must be stored in garages or backyards overnight." Katie had been so excited to ride her new bike that she'd forgotten to put it away. Lisa had planned to remind her, but Rebecca was already writing something else down. "Also," Rebecca continued, "we'll need you to submit an application for any outdoor decorations or modifications. I see there's a small garden gnome by your front steps." Lisa looked confused. "It's just a little gnome. The previous owners left it there. Nevertheless, all decorative items require approval." Rebecca's pen moved across her clipboard again. "Don't worry, it's usually just a formality. But we do need to maintain our community standards," the list went on. "No holiday decorations could stay up more than 2 weeks after the holiday. No packages could remain on doorsteps for more than 6 hours. No cars could be parked on the street overnight, even though every house had a 2-car driveway. The grass had to be cut weekly, but only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays, and 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekends." "Wow," Lisa said when Rebecca finally finished. "That's quite a list." "We pride ourselves on maintaining property values," Rebecca replied stiffly. "I'm sure you understand being in the legal profession yourself." Lisa was surprised. "How did you know I was a judge?" "Oh, we do our research on all new residents. Can't be too careful these days." Rebecca's smile turned even colder. "I'm sure someone in your position appreciates the importance of following rules." After Rebecca left, Lisa felt a little uneasy. There was something about the woman's tone that rubbed her the wrong way, but she shook it off. Rules were rules, and she could follow them. How hard could it be? The first violation notice appeared 3 days later. Lisa found it tucked under her windshield wiper when she came home from work. It was an official-looking document with the HOA letterhead, complete with a photo of her front yard. The offense: Katie's jump rope was visible on the front porch. Violation of Community Standards Section 4.2. Recreational equipment visible from street view. The fine was $50. Lisa stared at the notice in disbelief. Katie had been jumping rope for maybe 20 minutes before dinner. How is that worth a $50 fine? She called the HOA office the next morning, expecting to clear up what was obviously a mistake. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm looking at the photo right now," the office manager said. "The jump rope is clearly visible on your front porch. But my daughter was playing with it. She wasn't storing it there. According to our bylaws, recreational equipment cannot be visible from the street during non-use hours." Non-use hours? She had just put it down to come inside for dinner. "I'm sorry, but the rules are quite clear. The fine stands." Lisa hung up, feeling frustrated. $50 for a jump rope? This was getting ridiculous. But it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the violations kept coming. Katie's sidewalk chalk art was unauthorized street modification. Lisa's Amazon package that sat on her doorstep for 7 hours while she was in court was unsightly. Debris, even the oak tree, became a problem. When some of its leaves fell on the sidewalk, natural debris must be cleared within 24 hours, the notice read. Lisa tried to stay positive. She reminded herself that she had wanted a well-maintained community. But these weren't reasonable standards anymore. These were traps designed to catch people making normal, everyday mistakes. The worst part was how it was affecting Katie. Her daughter started asking permission before playing outside, worried that she might break another rule. She stopped bringing friends over because Lisa couldn't guarantee they wouldn't accidentally violate some obscure community standard. "Mom, can I ride my bike?" Katie asked one afternoon, holding her helmet uncertainly. "Of course, sweetie. Just remember to put it in the garage when you're done. What if I forget again? Will the mean lady come back?" Lisa's heart broke a little. Katie was talking about Rebecca, who had started making regular inspections of their property. The woman seemed to appear whenever Katie was playing outside, clipboard in hand, watching and waiting for any tiny infraction. That night, Lisa sat at her kitchen table with a growing pile of violation notices. The fines were adding up, but more importantly, her peace of mind was disappearing. This wasn't the fresh start she had hoped for. This was turning into a nightmare. She looked out her window at the perfect neighborhood with its perfect lawns and perfect houses. But perfection, she was beginning to realize, came at a price, and Rebecca Thornton was determined to collect every penny. 3 months into living in Oakwood Gardens, Lisa felt like she was walking on eggshells in her own home. Every morning before leaving for work, she'd do a quick scan of her property. Was Katie's bike properly stored? Were there any leaves on the sidewalk? Had the neighbor's cat left any paw prints on her freshly washed car? The violations had become almost weekly events. Rebecca seemed to have developed a sixth sense for finding problems that didn't exist before. Last Tuesday, it was the garden hose that Katie had left slightly crooked after watering her mother's flowers. The notice called it improper storage of utility equipment. The fine was $75. "I don't understand why she hates us so much," Katie said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. At 7 years old, she was too young to fully grasp what was happening. But she wasn't stupid. She could feel the tension every time Rebecca appeared. Lisa had been wondering the same thing. She'd tried being friendly, even baking cookies for Rebecca once, but the woman had accepted them with that same cold smile and handed Lisa another violation notice the very next day. This one was for having her recycling bin visible from the street 30 minutes past pickup time. The breaking point came during Katie's 8th birthday party. Lisa had planned everything carefully. She'd submitted the required special event application 2 weeks in advance, requesting permission to have 12 children over for a backyard birthday party. She'd even specified the exact hours, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. The HOA had approved it in writing, though Rebecca had made sure to include a long list of additional conditions. No music above conversation level. No decorations visible from the street. All guests must park in driveways only. Event must conclude precisely at stated time. Lisa had followed every single rule. The party was in the backyard, completely hidden from street view. The music was so quiet that the kids could barely hear it. She'd even asked the other parents to carpool to avoid any parking issues. Katie was having the time of her life. For the first time in months, she seemed like a normal kid again, laughing and playing with her friends without constantly looking over her shoulder for violations. That's when Rebecca appeared. Lisa was bringing out the birthday cake when she saw the HOA president marching across her backyard like she owned the place. Behind her were two police officers who looked deeply uncomfortable about being there. "Excuse me," Rebecca announced loudly, causing all the children to stop and stare. "This gathering is in violation of multiple community standards." Lisa felt her face burn with embarrassment as 24 eyes turned to look at her. The other parents, who had been chatting pleasantly by the back fence, fell silent. "Rebecca, I have written approval for this party," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Officer Martinez, what seems to be the problem?" Officer Martinez, whom Lisa recognized from her courtroom, looked mortified. "Ma'am, we received a noise complaint and a report of overcrowding. We're required to respond to all calls." "Noise complaint?" Lisa gestured around the quiet backyard. "Officer, does this look like a noise violation to you?" Before he could answer, Rebecca stepped forward with her clipboard. "According to my count, there are 14 children present. Your application clearly stated 12. Lisa stared at her. "2 extra kids? You called the police because of 2 extra children?" "Rules exist for a reason," Rebecca replied smugly. "Overcrowding creates safety hazards and disturbs the peace of our community." Katie had started to cry. Her friends looked scared and confused. One of the other mothers, Jennifer from Katie's school, stepped forward. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Jennifer said. "These are 8-year-olds eating cake, not a rock concert." "The community standards apply to all residents and their guests," Rebecca shot back. "If people can't follow simple rules, perhaps they'd be happier living elsewhere." Officer Martinez cleared his throat. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I don't see any violations here, but would it be possible to wrap up the party soon? Just to avoid any further complaints?" Lisa wanted to scream. Instead, she nodded and forced a smile for the children. "Of course, officer. We were almost finished anyway, but the damage was done." Within minutes, parents were collecting their children and making polite excuses about other plans. Katie's birthday party, which should have been a happy memory, ended with her sobbing in her mother's arms while Rebecca stood triumphantly in the background, making notes on her clipboard. "I hate her," Katie whispered through her tears. "I hate living here." That night, after Katie had cried herself to sleep, Lisa sat in her kitchen with a glass of wine and a decision to make. She'd been documenting every interaction with Rebecca, every unreasonable violation, every obvious case of harassment. As a judge, she understood the importance of building a paper trail. But this had gone beyond mere harassment. This was affecting her daughter's childhood, her ability to make friends, her sense of safety in her own home. No neighborhood rules were worth that. The next morning, Lisa called a lawyer friend for advice. "Document everything," her friend advised. "What you're describing sounds like targeted harassment. Has she treated other residents this way?" Lisa had been wondering about that herself. She'd noticed that Helen, the neighbor who'd brought cookies on moving day, had become distant lately. When Lisa asked her about it directly, Helen had looked around nervously before answering. "Rebecca has a lot of power in this community," Helen whispered. "She can make life very difficult for people who cross her. I'm sorry about Katie's party. That was completely out of line, but what? But Rebecca doesn't like being challenged, especially by someone like you. Someone like me." Helen hesitated. "A successful professional woman, a judge. Rebecca used to run this place like her personal kingdom, and then you moved in with your fancy job and your confidence. She sees you as a threat. That explained a lot." Lisa had noticed that Rebecca's treatment of her seemed to intensify after she'd mentioned her job during a community meeting. She'd thought being a judge might earn her some respect, but instead it had painted a target on her back. The harassment escalated after the birthday party incident. Rebecca began driving by Lisa's house multiple times a day, clearly looking for violations. She installed a security camera that was obviously positioned to monitor Lisa's front yard. She even started timing how long Lisa's car was parked on the street while she unloaded groceries. The violation notices became more frequent and more ridiculous. Katie's chalk art was now classified as unauthorized property modification. Lisa's morning newspaper, if it landed slightly off-center on her walkway, was improperly placed debris. Even the oak tree that had attracted Lisa to the house became a problem when Rebecca claimed its roots were encroaching on community property. "Maybe we should just move," Katie said one evening after finding another violation notice taped to their front door. This one was for having window blinds that were inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. Lisa looked at her daughter's defeated expression and felt her anger boil over. Katie was 8 years old. She should be worried about homework and playground games, not HOA violations and community aesthetic standards. "No," Lisa said firmly. "We're not moving. This is our home and we have every right to live here peacefully." But Rebecca wasn't finished. If anything, Lisa's refusal to back down only made her more determined. The woman seemed to have made it her personal mission to drive Lisa out of Oakwood Gardens, and she was getting more creative with her attacks. The next violation notice wasn't about Lisa's property at all. It was about Katie. "Unaccompanied minor observed on community property," the notice read. It included a photo of Katie walking to the school bus stop by herself, something she'd been doing safely for months. Lisa stared at the notice in disbelief. Rebecca was now targeting her daughter directly. This wasn't about community standards anymore. This was war, and Lisa was about to discover just how far Rebecca was willing to go to win it. Rebecca's obsession with Lisa had crossed into dangerous territory, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She'd started following Katie to the bus stop in the mornings, claiming she was ensuring community safety. She'd installed motion-activated lights that somehow only seemed to trigger when Lisa came home from work. She'd even begun questioning Katie's friends when they visited, asking them inappropriate questions about what went on inside the house. "Mrs. Thornton asked me if your mom yells at you," Katie's friend Megan whispered one afternoon while they were playing in the backyard. "She said she was worried about you." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Rebecca was now involving children in her harassment campaign. But what worried her more was the calculated nature of these questions. Rebecca wasn't just being nosy. She was fishing for information, building some kind of case. The revelation came from an unexpected source. Helen from down the street appeared at Lisa's door one evening, looking nervous and constantly glancing over her shoulder. "I need to tell you something," Helen said quietly. "Can I come in?" Once inside, Helen's composure cracked. "Rebecca came to see me last week. She was asking questions about you and Katie, weird questions." "What kind of questions?" "Like whether I'd ever seen Katie outside unsupervised, whether I'd heard you yelling, whether you had men over late at night." Helen wrung her hands. "I told her it was none of her business, but she said she was conducting a community wellness check." Lisa felt her stomach drop. "A wellness check? That's not all. She's been talking to other neighbors too. Mrs. Chen next door, the Johnsons across the street. She's telling people she's concerned about Katie's welfare." The pieces started falling into place. The photos of Katie walking to the bus stop, the questions about supervision, the sudden interest in Lisa's parenting. Rebecca wasn't just trying to drive them out anymore. She was building a case to have Katie removed from Lisa's custody. "Helen, did she ask you to sign anything?" Helen nodded miserably. "She had some kind of petition. She said it was just expressing concern for a neighbor child. I didn't sign it, but I think some people did. They don't understand what she's really doing." That night, Lisa called her lawyer friend again, this time with real urgency in her voice. "She's building a CPS case," her friend confirmed grimly. "Document everything. And I mean everything. Every interaction, every photo, every witness. If she's really planning what I think she's planning, you're going to need proof of her harassment pattern." Lisa began carrying a small recording device whenever she left the house. She installed a security camera of her own, positioned to capture Rebecca's frequent drive-bys and property inspections. She kept detailed logs of every violation notice, every unreasonable demand, every time Rebecca appeared uninvited on her property. But Rebecca was smart. She'd done her homework on Lisa's schedule, learning that as a family court judge, Lisa often worked late hours or had to attend emergency hearings. She'd identified the times when Katie might be home alone for an hour or two after school, waiting for her mother to return from court. What Lisa didn't know was that Rebecca had enlisted help. Her nephew David worked as a private investigator, and while he usually handled insurance fraud cases, he owed his aunt enough favors to take on this particular project. David began what Rebecca called surveillance for child safety. Purposes: He photographed Katie playing alone in the backyard, while Lisa worked in her home office, cropping the images to make it look like no adult was present. He documented the times Katie had to let herself into the house with her own key when Lisa was running late from court. He even staged a few incidents, like calling in a fake report about a crying child when Katie scraped her knee during normal playground activities, and the breakthrough in Rebecca's plan came when she discovered that Lisa's ex-husband had remarried and moved across the country. Even better, she learned that Lisa's own mother had been critical of her daughter's decision to take the demanding judge position. While raising a young child, alone, the child would be better off with family who can provide proper supervision, Rebecca told David as they reviewed their growing file of evidence. I'm not being vindictive. I'm being protective. David wasn't entirely comfortable with his aunt's methods, but he'd seen enough legitimate child endangerment cases to convince himself this might be necessary. Besides, Rebecca had helped him through some tough financial times. He owed her. The first official report was filed on a Thursday morning. Rebecca, using her position as HOA president and claiming to represent concerned community members, contacted Child Protective Services with a detailed complaint about Katie's living situation. The child is frequently left unsupervised for hours at a time, Rebecca reported, providing photos and dates. The mother works excessive hours and seems unable to maintain proper household standards. We've documented multiple safety violations and signs of neglect. The CPS worker who took the call was required to investigate all reports of potential child endangerment. Rebecca's status as an HOA president gave her complaint an air of legitimacy, and the photos, while misleading, showed what appeared to be a pattern of unsupervised time. I understand the mother is a family court judge, Rebecca added with false concern. I hate to make this report, but those of us who work with children professionally know that demanding careers can sometimes interfere with proper parenting. The investigation began immediately. A CPS caseworker named Tom Bradley was assigned to the case and began his review of Rebecca's materials. The photos were concerning at first glance, but Tom was experienced enough to look deeper. Something about the timing and angles seemed off, like someone had been deliberately trying to capture the worst possible moments. Lisa first learned about the investigation when Tom appeared at her door one evening while she and Katie were making dinner together. Mrs. Rodriguez? I'm Tom Bradley from Child Protective Services. We received a report of concern regarding your daughter's welfare, and I need to conduct a preliminary investigation. Lisa's blood ran cold, but her legal training kicked in immediately. Of course. May I see your identification and the complaint? Tom was impressed by Lisa's calm, professional response. Many parents became defensive or hostile when CPS appeared, but Lisa handled it like the legal professional she was. She provided him with character references, Katie's school records showing perfect attendance and strong academic performance, and medical records showing regular checkups and up-to-date vaccinations. Can you tell me who filed this complaint? Lisa asked after showing Tom around their well-maintained home. I can't reveal the complainant's identity, but I can tell you it came from someone in your community who expressed concern about supervision issues. Lisa didn't need him to spell it out. She knew exactly who had filed the report, and more importantly, she knew this was just the beginning of Rebecca's real attack. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom conducted a thorough investigation. He interviewed Katie at school, spoke with her teachers and the school counselor, and even arranged surprise visits to observe the mother-daughter interaction. What he found was a well-adjusted child living with a loving, responsible parent. But Rebecca wasn't finished. When the preliminary investigation failed to support her claims, she escalated her campaign. She began documenting every time Lisa worked late, every time Katie played outside without her mother standing directly beside her, every time a babysitter watched Katie instead of Lisa herself. The pattern of neglect is clear, Rebecca told David as they prepared their second report. That child needs a stable environment with family members who can provide full-time supervision. Rebecca had researched Lisa's ex-husband's new address and contacted his new wife, planting seeds of concern about Katie's welfare. She'd even reached out to Lisa's mother, suggesting that perhaps Katie would be better off with grandparents who could provide more consistent care. But Rebecca's biggest mistake was underestimating Lisa's legal expertise and her connections within the family court system, Lisa had been quietly building her own case, documenting every harassment incident, every unreasonable HOA demand, and every instance of Rebecca's suspicious behavior around Katie. The second CPS report triggered a more intensive investigation, but this time Tom Bradley was prepared. He'd already flagged Rebecca's first complaint as potentially false, and when another detailed report came in from the same community, he began to suspect harassment rather than genuine concern. What Rebecca didn't know was that Lisa had been working behind the scenes, gathering evidence of the harassment campaign and preparing for the legal battle she knew was coming. Rebecca thought she was playing chess, but she was actually walking into a trap set by someone who understood the legal system far better than she did. The real shock came when Rebecca decided to take her nuclear option. If CPS wouldn't remove Katie from Lisa's custody, Rebecca would find another way. She began researching emergency custody procedures, convinced that her documentation of child endangerment would be enough to get a family court judge to grant temporary custody to a more suitable guardian. What Rebecca failed to research was which judge might hear such a case. Rebecca's plan was audacious even by her own standards. When the second CPS investigation closed without any action taken, she realized that official channels weren't going to work. Tom Bradley had been too thorough, too professional. He'd seen through her carefully crafted narrative and recognized it for what it was: harassment disguised as concern. But Rebecca had one more card to play, and this one would bypass CPS entirely. "I've been researching emergency custody procedures," she told David during one of their planning sessions. "If we can prove immediate danger to the child, we can petition the family court directly for temporary custody." David looked uncomfortable. "Aunt Rebecca, that's a pretty serious step. Are you sure about this? That child is in danger," Rebecca insisted, though her conviction sounded more like obsession now. Her mother is never home, she's left alone for hours, and she's clearly not getting the attention she needs. "Look at these photos." The photos were the same misleading images David had been taking for months, carefully cropped and timed to show Katie in moments that looked concerning out of context. A picture of Katie crying after falling off her bike became child in distress with no supervision. Katie playing alone in the backyard while Lisa worked in her home office became child abandonment during work hours. "I can file as a concerned community member," Rebecca continued. "The HOA gives me standing to act in the interests of all residents, including children at risk." Rebecca had found a lawyer willing to take the case. Her friend Martin Webb from her real estate days had transitioned into family law, and while he wasn't particularly successful, he was available and cheap. More importantly, he was willing to file the petition without asking too many uncomfortable questions. "We'll request emergency temporary custody," Martin explained during their consultation. "I can argue that as HOA president, you have a duty to protect community members, especially vulnerable children. The key is to file on a Friday afternoon when the courts are busy, and hope we get a judge who doesn't have time to look too closely at the details." Rebecca loved the plan. She would present herself as a reluctant but responsible community leader, forced to take action to protect a child whose mother was too busy with her career to provide proper care. She'd bring character witnesses from the HOA board, present her carefully documented evidence, and request that Katie be placed temporarily with her grandmother or father, while Lisa underwent parenting evaluation. The petition was filed on Friday afternoon, just as Martin had suggested. It was assigned to Judge Robert Chen's emergency docket for the following Monday morning. Rebecca spent the weekend rehearsing her testimony, convincing herself that she was doing the right thing. "This isn't about the HOA violations anymore," she told herself in the mirror Sunday night. "This is about saving a child from a mother who's too proud to admit she's failing." Monday morning arrived with Rebecca feeling more confident than she had in months. She dressed professionally, brought 3 HOA board members as witnesses, and prepared a presentation that painted Lisa as a workaholic judge who'd lost sight of her priorities as a mother. Martin had prepared opening statements that would emphasize Rebecca's community leadership role and her reluctant decision to intervene. They'd rehearsed questions that would highlight every instance of Katie being alone, every time Lisa worked late, every moment that could be twisted into evidence of neglect. "Remember," Martin coached as they walked into the courthouse, You're not the villain here. You're the concerned neighbor who finally had to act when no one else would protect this child." Rebecca nodded, clutching her folder of photos and documentation. She'd been preparing for this moment for months. Everything she'd endured from Lisa's arrogance, her refusal to follow simple community rules, her attitude of superiority because of her fancy job, would finally be addressed. They arrived at the courtroom 15 minutes early, giving Rebecca time to settle her nerves and review her notes one final time. Martin checked in with the clerk and confirmed that they were first on the docket. The emergency hearing would be brief but decisive. Other cases were being shuffled around due to scheduling conflicts, but their case remained solid on Judge Chen's calendar. Rebecca allowed herself a small smile. By lunchtime, Katie would be safe with responsible family members, and Lisa would finally understand that actions have consequences. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise for the honorable judge presiding. Rebecca stood along with everyone else, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment when justice would finally be served, when an out-of-control mother would face the consequences of putting her career ahead of her child's welfare. But when Rebecca looked up at the judge's bench, her blood turned to ice. Lisa Rodriguez sat behind the bench in her judicial robes, looking directly at Rebecca with an expression of calm professionalism that somehow managed to be terrifying. "Your Honor," Martin stammered, clearly as shocked as his client, "we weren't informed about the change in presiding judge." Lisa's voice was steady and controlled as she addressed the court. "Due to a last-minute scheduling conflict, Judge Chen and I have exchanged dockets for today's emergency session. Mr. Webb, I trust this presents no problems for your client?" Rebecca felt like the floor was disappearing beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. The woman she was trying to have, declared an unfit mother, was now the judge who would decide the case. The irony was so perfect it felt like a setup. But she knew it was just horrible. "Horrible luck, Your Honor," Martin tried again. "Given the personal nature of this case, Mr. Webb," Lisa interrupted smoothly, "I am intimately familiar with every detail of this matter, having been the target of the behaviors that led to this filing. Unless you're suggesting I recuse myself from a case involving my own child, I believe I'm uniquely qualified to evaluate the evidence presented." Lisa's judicial demeanor was flawless, but Rebecca could see something else in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold satisfaction that made Rebecca's stomach churn. "Now then," Lisa continued, "I've reviewed the petition and supporting materials. Mrs. Thornton, you're requesting emergency temporary custody of my daughter based on allegations of neglect and endangerment. Is that correct?" Rebecca found her voice, though it came out higher than usual. "Yes, Your Honor. As a concerned community member and HOA president, I felt compelled to act in the child's best interests." "I see. And Mr. Webb, you're arguing that Mrs. Thornton has standing to request custody of a child to whom she has no familial relationship, based on her position as president of a homeowners association?" Martin was sweating now. "Your Honor, Mrs. Thornton has documented a pattern of concerning behavior and believes intervention is necessary for the child's welfare." Lisa nodded thoughtfully, as if she were considering the argument seriously. But Rebecca could tell this was all performance. Lisa had been waiting for this moment, probably hoping Rebecca would be stupid enough to try something exactly this reckless. "Mrs. Thornton," Lisa said, "please present your evidence of child endangerment." Rebecca's hands shook as she opened her folder. The photos that had seemed so convincing in her living room now felt pathetic under the fluorescent courtroom lights. Each image would have to be explained to the very person she'd been stalking to take them. "Your Honor, this photo shows the child unsupervised in the backyard," Rebecca began, holding up a picture of Katie playing alone. "I see," Lisa replied calmly. "And where exactly was I when this photo was taken?" Rebecca hesitated. I believe you were working." "Working where, Mrs. Thornton?" In the house. So I was home supervising my daughter from inside the house, and you consider this endangerment?" The first crack appeared in Rebecca's confidence. She flipped to the next photo showing Katie walking to the bus stop. "This shows the child walking to school alone without adult supervision." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Thornton, how far is it from my front door to the bus stop?" Approximately 200 yards. "And how old is my daughter?" 8 years old. Mrs. Thornton, in your professional opinion as an HOA president, at what age should a child be allowed to walk 200 yards to catch a school bus? Rebecca realized she was being systematically destroyed, but she couldn't stop now. She was in too deep, and every answer only made her look more foolish. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes, with Lisa methodically dismantling each piece of evidence while maintaining perfect judicial composure. Rebecca's photos became examples of normal childhood activities. Her documentation of Lisa's work schedule became proof of a dedicated professional balancing career and motherhood. Her complaints about supervision became the obsessive stalking behavior of an unhinged neighbor. By the time Lisa called for character witnesses, Rebecca's case had completely collapsed. But the real humiliation was still to come. Lisa had spent months preparing for this moment, though she never could have imagined it would unfold quite like this. The irony of Rebecca facing the very judge she'd been trying to destroy was almost too perfect to believe. "Mrs. Thornton," Lisa continued in her calm, judicial voice, "before we proceed with character witnesses, I'd like to enter some additional evidence into the record." Rebecca felt her remaining confidence crumble as Lisa nodded to the bailiff, who wheeled in a cart loaded with documents, photographs, and recording equipment. "Your Honor," Martin Webb protested weakly, "we weren't informed about additional evidence." "Mr. Webb, this is an emergency hearing based on allegations of immediate danger to my child. I believe the court has a right to examine all relevant evidence, including the pattern of behavior that led to these accusations." Lisa began systematically presenting her case, and Rebecca realized she'd been walking into a trap for months. Every violation notice, every unreasonable demand, every instance of harassment had been carefully documented by someone who understood exactly how to build a legal case. "Exhibit A," Lisa announced, "is a collection of 47 violation notices issued to my property over a 6-month period. Note the escalating nature of the complaints and the trivial basis for many of these citations." She held up photos of Katie's chalk art, labeled as unauthorized property modification. Pictures of a garden hose coiled slightly askew, called improper utility storage. Even the famous jump rope incident was there, documented with Lisa's own photos showing how briefly the toy had been visible. Exhibit B consists of recordings made during Mrs. Thornton's visits to my property, including several instances where she made threats about my continued residence in the community. Rebecca's face went white as her own voice filled the courtroom. "If people can't follow simple rules, perhaps they'd be happier living elsewhere." Exhibit C, Lisa continued relentlessly, documents Mrs. Thornton's escalating surveillance of my family, including photographs of her taking unauthorized pictures of my daughter and timing my comings and goings. The photos were devastating. Lisa had captured Rebecca crouched behind cars, hiding in bushes, even using binoculars to spy on their backyard activities. What Rebecca had thought was discreet observation looked like the behavior of a dangerous stalker when presented in court. "Your Honor," Martin tried to interrupt, "my client was conducting legitimate community oversight." "Mr. Webb," Lisa replied sharply, "are you suggesting that photographing a child without parental consent constitutes legitimate community oversight?" Martin fell silent, realizing his client's case was beyond salvaging, but Lisa wasn't finished. She called Tom Bradley, the CPS investigator, who testified about the false reports and his conclusion that they represented harassment rather than genuine concern. She presented testimony from Katie's teachers, school counselor, and pediatrician, all confirming that Katie was a well-adjusted, properly cared-for child. Then came the neighbors. Helen was the first to testify, nervously explaining how Rebecca had pressured her to sign a petition against Lisa and asked her to spy on the family's activities. "She told me she was going to get that woman out of our neighborhood one way or another," Helen testified reluctantly. "She said someone like her didn't belong in a community like ours." "Someone like her?" Lisa asked. "What did Mrs. Thornton mean by that?" "She said successful women with fancy jobs thought they were better than everyone else. She said you needed to be taught a lesson about following rules." The testimony continued with other neighbors who had been approached by Rebecca, each revealing another piece of the harassment campaign. Mrs. Chen testified about being asked to document noise levels during Katie's birthday party. The Johnson family described being recruited to watch for suspicious activity at Lisa's house. Even some of the HOA board members, who had come to support Rebecca, began distancing themselves as the true scope of her obsession became clear. "I thought we were just maintaining community standards," board member Frank Peterson testified when called by Lisa. "I had no idea Mrs. Thornton was taking photographs of children or filing false reports with authorities, but the most damning testimony came from David, Rebecca's nephew. Lisa's legal team had tracked him down and convinced him to tell the truth about his aunt's activities. She hired me to gather evidence about the family," David admitted miserably. "I took photos and documented their schedule. I even staged some incidents to make things look worse than they were." Rebecca watched in horror as her own nephew detailed the elaborate surveillance operation, the misleading photos and the false reports to authorities. David looked genuinely remorseful as he explained how Rebecca had convinced him they were protecting a child, when they were actually victimizing a family. "Mrs. Thornton told me that judges think they're above the law," David testified. "She said someone needed to prove that even judges have to face consequences for their actions." Lisa had heard enough. She dismissed the character witnesses Rebecca had brought, noting that their testimony about community standards was irrelevant to the question of child endangerment. "Mrs. Thornton," Lisa said, fixing Rebecca with a stare that could have frozen fire, "you have systematically harassed my family for months, filed false reports with Child Protective Services, stalked my daughter, and now attempted to use the legal system to achieve what your harassment campaign could not accomplish." Rebecca stood frozen as Lisa continued her devastating assessment. "Your petition claims concern for my daughter's welfare, but the evidence shows this case is entirely about your personal vendetta against me. You have weaponized community standards, abused your position as HOA president, and endangered the well-being of an innocent child to satisfy your own ego." Lisa paused, letting the words sink in throughout the courtroom. "This petition is not only denied, it is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, including filing false police reports, harassment, stalking, and abuse of process." Rebecca felt like she might collapse. The courtroom seemed to be spinning around her as the full implications hit her. "Additionally," Lisa continued, "I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of my family or my property. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." But Lisa wasn't done yet. "Mrs. Thornton, I want to be very clear about something. You attempted to separate a loving mother from her child based on fabricated evidence and personal animosity. In my 20 years of legal experience, I have rarely seen such a calculated abuse of the family court system." Lisa's voice carried the full weight of judicial authority as she delivered her final judgment. "You forgot something important when you planned this attack, Mrs. Thornton. You forgot that I am not just any mother you can intimidate or any resident you can bully. I am an officer of this court, and I understand exactly how the legal system works." Rebecca's lawyer was frantically packing his briefcase, clearly wanting to escape as quickly as possible. The HOA board members who had come to support her were staring at the floor, probably calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from her actions. "Furthermore," Lisa added, "I will be filing a civil lawsuit against you and the HOA for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of our civil rights. The damages will include legal fees, emotional trauma to my daughter, and punitive damages for your outrageous conduct." As the gavel came down, ending the hearing, Rebecca understood that her war against Lisa had not only failed spectacularly, but had destroyed her own life in the process. She faced potential criminal charges, a civil lawsuit that could bankrupt her, and the complete humiliation of having her vindictive campaign exposed in open court. 6 months later, Rebecca was no longer HOA president. The community had voted her out in an emergency election after the criminal charges were filed. She'd been convicted of filing false reports and sentenced to community service and probation. The civil lawsuit had forced her to sell her house to pay damages to Lisa's family. David lost his private investigator license and had to find a new career. Martin Webb faced disciplinary action from the state bar for filing a frivolous lawsuit based on fabricated evidence. The new HOA board issued a formal apology to Lisa and completely rewrote the community bylaws to prevent future abuse of power. They established an appeals process for violations and removed the authority of any single board member to issue fines or file complaints with authorities. Katie, now 9 years old, was thriving in the peaceful environment that had finally been restored to their neighborhood. The treehouse that had once been a source of violations was now the envy of every kid in Oakwood Gardens. "Mom," Katie said one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset over their perfectly imperfect lawn, "I'm glad we didn't move away." Lisa smiled, remembering the scared little girl who had once asked if they could leave because of the mean lady. Now Katie played freely in their yard, rode her bike without fear of violation notices, and had friends over whenever she wanted. "Me too, sweetheart," Lisa replied. "Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies even when it's scary." "Especially when you're a judge," Katie added with a grin. Lisa laughed. "Especially then." As they watched their neighbors going about their evening routines in peace, Lisa reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. Rebecca had tried to use the legal system as a weapon, never imagining she might face the very person she was attacking from behind the judge's bench. It was a lesson in the dangers of assuming you-know-who holds the power, and a reminder that justice sometimes has a sense of irony that no one could have scripted.